You're about to witness the raw power of nature, unleashed in 6 gripping stories of bear attacks, where ordinary moments turned into desperate fights for survival. These intense accounts reveal the terrifying speed and ferocity of grizzlies, Kodiak, and polar bears when provoked or surprised. From unexpected encounters in the wilderness to chilling close calls, this video will take you through 6 harrowing tales of bear attacks on humans, reminding us of the beauty and danger that coexist in the wild. On the overcast afternoon of July 5th, 2025, Yelena Vostrikova set out on what should have been a routine walk through the quiet woods near her rural home in southern Sakhalin. At 42, she was a well-known professional dog walker in the community, kind, dependable, and fiercely devoted to animals. That day, she was walking 3 of her regular clients' dogs, 2 energetic huskies and a gentle spaniel mix. She chose a familiar trail that edged along a birch and spruce forest. The late summer air was cool, tinged with the scent of moss and damp leaves. The dogs trotted beside her, tails wagging, their leashes jingling softly in her hand as they sniffed their way along the shaded path. Just before the attack, Yelena had phoned her husband, Dmitry, to share a light moment. The playful energy of the dogs, the way sunlight filtered through the trees. Their conversation was casual and full of warmth, the kind that marks an ordinary day. But as they talked, the forest shifted. A low growl, almost too deep to register at first, rumbled beneath the sound of rustling leaves. Yelena froze. On the other end of the line, Dmitry heard her sudden silence and asked what was wrong. His voice, filled with concern, was the last thing she would hear before chaos erupted. A massive Russian grizzly burst from the underbrush. Its fur was matted, bloodied from a deep wound along its flank, likely the result of a poacher's trap. The bear's eyes were wild with pain and rage. It roared, the sound thunderous in the quiet forest, sending birds screaming into the air and throwing the dogs into a frenzy of panicked barking. The huskies sprang forward instinctively, barking and snarling in a desperate attempt to protect their handler. Yelena tried to pull them back, struggling to maintain control, but the bear was already closing the distance. It moved with terrifying speed, its paws crashing through the brush, teeth bared and eyes locked on her. The dogs lunged at the bear's legs, their bravery fierce but futile. With one sweep of its massive paw, the grizzly sent them flying. Their bodies hit the ground hard, yelps cutting through the air. Yelena screamed and moved to shield them, raising an arm in a hopeless attempt to fend off the attack. The bear slammed into her. Its jaws clamped down on her shoulder, tearing through flesh and muscle. The force drove her to the forest floor, her phone still clutched in one blood-slicked hand as Dmitry's voice cracked through the speaker. Confused, desperate, calling her name. The forest filled with screams, snarls, and the grunts of the bear as it mauled her with terrifying precision. It bit into her torso and neck, each attack punctuated by sickening sounds of tearing flesh and bone. Her limbs thrashed weakly beneath the weight of the bear's massive frame. The dogs' barks faded into silence. Their broken bodies lay sprawled across the dirt, blood soaking into the mossy ground. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the loamy scent of disturbed earth. Dmitry's voice continued to pour from the phone, rising in pitch, begging her to run, to speak, to survive. But there was no escape. The grizzly kept attacking until Yelena lay motionless. Her blood pooled around her, soaking the forest floor. Eventually, the bear raised its head, breathing heavily. It sniffed the air, perhaps sensing human scent carried from the nearby village, and lumbered away into the trees with a final guttural growl. Then silence. Yelena's body lay still among the 3 dogs. Her phone remained connected, her husband's voice still coming through, trembling with grief. He called her name again and again. No reply came. It was hours before the first responders arrived. The scene they found was harrowing. Blood streaked the trail and stained the pale trunks of the nearby trees. Yelena's body lay amid the shredded remains of the dogs, her clothes torn, her skin marked by deep lacerations and claw marks. The damage spoke to both her suffering and her desperate efforts to protect the animals she loved. Paramedics confirmed she had died at the scene. Wildlife officers arriving shortly after began investigating. Claw marks on the trees, scattered tufts of fur, and a foul smell of decay further into the forest suggested the bear had been guarding a nearby food cache, likely a carcass it had dragged and buried days before. That behavior, paired with the wound on its side, pointed to a bear that had become unusually aggressive and unpredictable. The attack devastated the small community. Dmitry, heartbroken and in shock, later gave an emotional statement to local reporters, pleading for better awareness and stronger protections. Officials echoed his concerns. They called for stricter enforcement of wildlife ordinances, increased use of bear-proof bins, and better public education about the dangers of walking dogs in bear-active areas. Experts also emphasized the risks posed by injured bears or those guarding food caches, which are far more likely to respond with sudden aggression. The bear was never found. Its trail vanished into the thick forest, leaving behind only the destruction it had caused. In the weeks that followed, flowers were placed at the edge of the trail where Yelena was last seen alive. Notes and candles appeared beside a small wooden cross, etched with her name and the names of the 3 dogs she walked that day. The site became a quiet place of mourning and remembrance. Yelena's story became a stark reminder of the wild's unpredictability, even in places that feel safe and familiar. The forest she had loved and shared with the animals she cared for had turned suddenly, violently, against her. And while such attacks remain rare, they underscore the fragile boundary between human lives and the untamed world that still lies just beyond the tree line. On a fog-shrouded July morning in Montana, 34-year-old Ethan Collins pushed himself harder than ever. A dedicated ultra-marathon runner known for embracing grueling conditions, Ethan set out before dawn, eager to test his endurance along a remote forest trail near a winding river. The mist was thick and damp, clinging to his skin as he ran. Each step sent small puffs of condensation swirling in his wake, while his breath came in steady, controlled bursts. The outlines of towering pines blurred in the fog, and the trail's edges vanished into the white void. Only the faint gurgle of the river broke the silence, comforting yet ominous. Ethan was lost in the rhythm of his stride, his mind focused and quiet. But that calm shattered in an instant. A sudden crackle of branches pierced the fog. Then, a massive shape exploded out of the white. A grizzly bear, huge and dark with wet fur and wild eyes, charged straight at him. Its mouth opened in a silent snarl, and for a moment time stopped. There was no warning, no time to run. The bear slammed into him with bone-jarring force, knocking him sideways toward the trail's edge. Loose gravel skidded underfoot. Ethan fought to stay upright, but the bear was already on him. Its claws tore into his running pack, jaws clamping around the thick nylon straps. With terrifying strength, it yanked him toward the riverbank, dragging him closer to the icy water that roared just meters below. Ethan twisted and kicked, punching the bear's snout with every ounce of strength he had. His fists struck wet fur and solid bone, but the blows barely slowed the animal. Its hot breath blasted against his face. Guttural growls filled the air as the bear hauled him toward the water's edge, where jagged rocks and violent current promised a deadly fall. Somewhere in the chaos, his hand found the bear spray clipped to his belt. His fingers, slick with blood, fumbled with the safety cap. Claws shredded his shoulder. The straps of his pack bit deeper into his chest. The world shrank into a tunnel of pain, noise, and survival instinct. Then, release. With a hiss, the canister discharged, a searing orange cloud erupting directly into the bear's face. The spray filled the air with its acrid sting. The bear let out a tortured, rasping roar and recoiled, eyes squinting shut, head thrashing in agony. It released its grip, and Ethan stumbled backward. His feet slid out from under him. He hit the muddy slope and tumbled into the river's freezing shallows. The shock of the cold was immediate and paralyzing. Pain radiated from the gashes on his shoulder and thigh, blood mixing with the rushing water. Gasping, he flailed to stay afloat, ears ringing with the thundering pulse of adrenaline and the roar of the current. Above him, the bear coughed and pawed at its streaming eyes. It hovered at the edge of the bank, just meters away. Ethan screamed. His cries echoed through the fog, carrying across the forest until they reached two hikers starting early on a nearby trail. The sound pierced the mist like a flare. They ran toward it, their silhouettes emerging like ghosts from the white veil. The hikers saw Ethan's bloodied form half submerged in the water, and the bear staggering above him. For a moment, the grizzly's attention shifted toward the newcomers. Then, with a low growl, it turned and lumbered back into the woods, disappearing into the fog within seconds. The hikers slid down the bank, grabbing Ethan's arms and pulling him to the muddy shore. His body trembled, breath sharp and uneven. Blood streamed from torn muscle on his shoulder and thigh. One hiker tore strips from a shirt, pressing them into the wounds. The other dialed emergency services, voice shaking as they relayed the location and severity of the attack. Rescue teams arrived within half an hour. Paramedics moved quickly, checking Ethan's vitals as they loaded him onto a stretcher. His face was pale, his eyes glazed with shock but still conscious. Mud clung to his skin, the bite marks and claw wounds were deep, yet he had survived. As the ambulance carried him away, sirens faded into the mist, and the forest fell silent again. Wildlife officials investigated later that day. They found tracks along the river and tufts of fur snagged in low branches. It appeared the bear had been moving through the area before sunrise, possibly spooked, disoriented, or guarding a food source nearby. Officials issued warnings immediately, urging caution to runners, hikers, and campers in foggy conditions where visibility was poor and grizzlies could be startled without warning. Ethan was treated for multiple lacerations, torn muscle in his left shoulder, and a deep thigh wound. He spent a week in the hospital and would need months of rehabilitation. But the bear spray had made the difference between survival and death. The incident underscored a growing concern among outdoor experts. Fog and limited visibility are among the most dangerous conditions for wildlife encounters. Predators like grizzlies, already unpredictable, become far more dangerous when surprised at close range. Runners, who often move quickly and quietly through trails, may be especially at risk. For Ethan, the run had been part of his routine. He knew the trail, knew the risks, but nothing could have prepared him for the suddenness of the attack. It lasted just minutes, but left deep, lasting scars, physical and psychological. Still, he was lucky. His training, instincts, and equipment saved his life. The bear spray worked. The hikers came. And the river, though cold and brutal, did not take him. In the weeks that followed, he spoke publicly about his experience, urging other endurance athletes to take safety precautions seriously, carry deterrents, avoid running in fog, and never underestimate the unpredictability of the wild. The trail that nearly became his last now stood as a place of reflection, a reminder that even for the strongest and most prepared, nature holds the final word, and it doesn't always give warnings. A violent storm swept over Kodiak Island, shaking the ground with thunder and wind that roared through the towering trees. Lightning flashed in blinding bursts, briefly revealing twisted trunks and bending canopies, while sheets of icy rain lashed the forest floor. In a small clearing, a tent shuddered under the relentless assault, its thin nylon walls straining with every gust. Inside, 39-year-old Sergei Malinov lay tense beneath his sleeping bag, listening. A seasoned adventure guide, he had led 3 friends deep into the island's wilderness for what was supposed to be a thrilling night beneath the trees. But now the storm raged above them, and unease hung heavy inside the tent. Each flash of lightning lit the fabric in stark whites and shadows, casting fleeting images of fear on his companions' faces. Thunder cracked so loud it felt like the ground itself might split open. None of them realized the mistake they had made, leaving food inside the tent. The scent of meat and sweets drifted through the clearing, carried by storm-tossed winds through a forest already wild with chaos, and something out there had caught the scent. Between thunderclaps came eerie silences, broken only by the hiss of rain on leaves and the creak of swaying trees. But beneath it, barely audible, came the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. At first, it was little more than a whisper of branches and crunching twigs, then heavier, deliberate rustling, close, too close. A low growl rose above the downpour. Sergei's head snapped toward the sound. Before he could move, the tent wall beside him erupted inward with a sharp crack. The fabric tore open, and through the rip surged the massive head of a Kodiak bear. Its eyes blazed in the next flash of lightning, its fur slick with rain and matted with debris. The bear roared, a deep, primal sound that drowned even the thunder. Hot breath filled the tent with the stench of wet fur and wild fear. Panic erupted. Sergei lunged forward, instinctively trying to shield his friends. But the bear was already on him, its jaws closing around his shoulder with brutal force. The impact lifted him from the floor and slammed him down hard into the mud as claws shredded the tent around them. Gear scattered into the storm. Sergei screamed, the sound raw and agonizing, vanishing into the roar of the wind. The others scrambled, fumbling for flashlights, hands shaking uncontrollably. Beams of light cut through the rain, flashing across the bear's soaked fur. Its eyes reflected yellow in the glow, its jaws still clenched around Sergei's bleeding shoulder. Blood pooled in the mud, diluted by the rain as thunder cracked once more above them. One camper, desperate and adrenaline-fueled, grabbed a small hatchet from the gear pile and swung. The blade struck the bear's shoulder, a glancing blow, but enough to make the animal rear up with a furious roar. It stood over the ruins of the tent, towering above them, backlit by another burst of lightning that etched its silhouette in the storm. The campers shouted and waved their lights, trying to drive it off. The bear turned, eyes flicking toward the dark tree line. Its ears flattened. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the clearing like daylight for a breathless second. The bear held still, muscles taut, head low, breath steaming in the cold rain. Another thunderclap boomed overhead, louder than before. The trees around them shivered in the gusts. Then, with a final snarl, the bear turned and crashed back into the forest. Branches snapped in its wake as it vanished into the shadows. The storm swallowed the sound, and only rain and wind remained. The tent lay in pieces. The floor was soaked, bloodied, gear half submerged in mud. Sergei groaned, his breath ragged, body racked with pain. Deep puncture wounds gaped in his shoulder, muscles torn where the bear had bitten. His friends pressed shirts to the injury, hands trembling as they tried to stop the bleeding. One camper reached for the satellite phone, voice hoarse as he shouted over the wind, struggling to relay their location to emergency services. Time stretched endlessly. Sergei faded in and out, pain pulling him between lucidity and darkness. Then, finally, headlights emerged from the woods. Bright beams pierced the downpour. Emergency responders stepped into the clearing, voices urgent but steady. They knelt beside Sergei, assessing his wounds, wrapping bandages tight to slow the bleeding. He winced as they lifted him onto a stretcher, his eyes fluttering open. His friends followed close behind, caked in mud, their faces streaked with rain and shock. The ambulance doors closed with a soft thud, barely audible over the storm's roar. Inside, paramedics worked quickly, keeping Sergei conscious, murmuring instructions as the vehicle sped away. In the clearing, the others stood silent, flashlights sweeping over the shredded tent and scattered belongings, unable to speak. In the following days, wildlife officials confirmed what Sergei and his friends already suspected. The bear had likely been drawn by the smell of food left in the tent. The chaos of the storm masked its approach, giving the campers no warning. Lightning and thunder may have startled the animal, adding to its aggression in an already volatile encounter. The story spread quickly across Alaska. Experts reminded visitors of the golden rule in bear country: never store food inside your tent. Always hang it well away from camp, sealed and suspended. In wild places like Kodiak, even a small oversight can invite catastrophe. Sergei survived. His wounds required surgery and weeks of recovery, but he pulled through thanks to the fast actions of his friends and the emergency teams who reached them through the storm. Still, the memory of that night would never leave them. For each of them, the roar of wind would forever carry the echo of another roar, deeper, older, and far more dangerous. In the wilderness, nature does not yield. And in the heart of a storm, surrounded by darkness and wildness, even a seasoned guide can be reminded just how thin the line between control and chaos truly is. The summer sun filtered gently through the towering pines as Mark Dawson, a 42-year-old accountant from Bozeman, led his wife and 2 children along a narrow trail deep in Montana's backcountry on July 8, 2019. They had set out early that morning, eager for a day of fresh air and adventure, hoping to share the beauty of the wild with their kids. Mark walked ahead, his wife close behind with their youngest, while their older child skipped between them, pointing out birds darting through the branches and squirrels rustling through the underbrush. The air was warm, the forest alive with the scent of pine needles and the soft hum of insects. The trail wound through sun-dappled clearings and patches of fern, everything calm and quiet, until they rounded a bend and stepped into a small meadow, bordered by thick shrubs and fallen logs. They didn't see her at first. Just beyond the clearing, a massive grizzly sow stood with 2 small cubs nestled beside her, their round faces peeking curiously through the brush. The bear's ears twitched at the sound of approaching footsteps, her body tensing as she locked eyes with Mark, who froze mid-step, breath catching in his throat. Behind him, his wife gasped sharply, clutching their youngest child tighter as the weight of the moment sank in. The air went still. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Then the silence shattered. With a guttural roar, the grizzly charged, exploding from the brush with terrifying speed, her protective instinct triggered by the sudden proximity of humans. Her massive frame tore through the meadow, grass and dirt flying beneath her powerful limbs. Mark barely had time to raise his arms before the bear slammed into him. The impact knocked him backward into the soft earth. Claws and teeth tore into his chest and neck with primal force. Blood sprayed across the clearing as the bear roared again, jaws clamping down with horrifying precision. Her cubs watched from the brush as their mother unleashed a fury born of instinct and fear. His wife screamed, sharp and ragged, as she stumbled back with their youngest in her arms, eyes wide with terror. Their older child stood frozen for a split second, then turned and ran, voice hoarse with panic as they screamed for help, feet pounding down the trail, tears streaming. The peaceful forest had transformed in seconds into a scene of chaos and horror. Mark thrashed weakly beneath the bear, his hands scrabbling at the ground, breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. Blood bubbled at his lips. The bear's claws raked across his ribs and shoulders, jaws tearing deeper, every movement a blur of fury. His wife, shaking and desperate, shouted and waved her arms, stomping the ground in a futile attempt to distract the bear. But fear held her back from getting closer, her instincts torn between saving her husband and protecting her child. The sight of Mark's bloodied body forced her to stagger away, her cries rising above the snarls and crashing branches. The older child's frantic cries carried through the forest, reaching a group of nearby campers a few hundred yards away. They froze, listened, and then sprang into action, grabbing flares and anything that could make noise as they sprinted toward the screams. They burst into the clearing just as the bear lifted her blood-streaked head, ears pricking at the noise and light. The campers ignited their flares, red sparks hissing and sputtering in the humid air as they shouted, waving their arms and circling wide. The sow hesitated, torn between fight and flight. Her eyes flicked to the brush where her cubs waited. She growled once more, a deep, guttural warning, then turned, crashing into the undergrowth with surprising speed, her cubs bounding after her. In seconds, they were gone. Silence returned, broken only by the sobs of Mark's wife and the low crackle of dying flares. The campers rushed to Mark's side, but the damage was too severe. His body lay still, deep wounds across his neck and chest leaving no doubt. Blood soaked the grass and pooled in the soft earth around him. Emergency services arrived within the hour, their vehicles navigating rugged forest roads to reach the shattered family. Paramedics and rangers moved quickly, comforting the children, wrapping Mark's wife in a blanket, and gently guiding her away from the scene. Her eyes were distant, locked on the spot where her husband had fallen. Officials marked the trail with warning signs and cordoned off the area. Word of the attack spread quickly. In the days that followed, wildlife experts held press conferences urging caution throughout Montana's backcountry. They reminded hikers to carry bear spray, travel in groups, and avoid thick brush where visibility was low. Above all, they warned that a mother grizzly with cubs is one of the most dangerous animals in North America, unpredictable and willing to attack without hesitation if she perceives a threat to her young. Mark Dawson's tragic death served as a chilling reminder of nature's raw unpredictability. Even on a familiar trail, even with the best intentions, one moment could change everything. What began as a peaceful family outing had ended in unimaginable loss, a stark lesson in the fragile line between awe and danger in the wilderness. Montana's wild beauty had drawn them in, but beneath the towering pines and sunlit meadows, nature had reminded them, with claws and teeth, that it is still and always will be wild. The sun hung low over Svalbard's frozen shoreline on September 29, 2023, casting long, pale rays across a landscape of fractured ridges and endless ice. The Arctic horizon glowed steel blue under a cold, cloudless sky. Photographer Soren Bjornstad, a 36-year-old Arctic specialist from Oslo, trudged carefully along the frost-bitten beach, his breath misting in the frigid air as he searched for the perfect shot. All around him, the silence felt almost sacred, broken only by the distant groan of shifting sea ice and the muffled crunch of snow beneath his heavy boots. He had positioned himself near a jagged ridge that overlooked the gray waters of the Arctic Ocean, framing the light as it danced across frozen swells and glinted off crystalline formations along the shore. So focused was he on capturing the stark beauty before him that he never noticed the movement behind him, an immense white shape navigating the ridges with slow, deliberate steps. A large male polar bear, gaunt and driven by hunger, moved silently across the snow, its black eyes locked onto the lone figure standing exposed at the ice's edge. When the wind shifted, carrying the scent of sweat, wool, and camera grease, the bear's ears twitched. It paused, muscles coiling. Then it charged. The attack came without warning. The bear thundered across the snow with terrifying speed, its massive paws barely making a sound over the ice. Soren turned at the last second, startled by the crunch of ice behind him, and froze. The bear bore down on him, breath steaming in the cold as it closed the gap in seconds, jaws open in a silent roar. Soren barely had time to raise his arms before the massive predator collided with him, a wall of fur and muscle that slammed him to the ground with bone-rattling force. Air exploded from his lungs in a single gasp as he hit the snow. Pain erupted in his ribs as the bear's jaws clamped down on his left side. Sharp teeth tore through layers of thick clothing and sank deep into flesh, the pressure threatening to crush bone. Soren screamed, the sound carried away by the wind across the empty expanse. Eyes watering from pain and cold, he reached for the only weapon within reach, his heavy carbon fiber tripod. He swung it blindly, jabbing at the bear's head with wild, desperate blows. One strike landed near its snout. The animal grunted and shook its head, spraying blood-flecked snow into the air, but it didn't retreat. With a roar, the bear reared onto its hind legs and struck. One massive paw slashed through Soren's parka like it was paper, claws raking deep across his ribs and shoulder. The blow sent him sprawling, his head cracking against the hard-packed snow, a flash of light bursting behind his eyes. Cold and shock seeped into his limbs. Still, he held onto the tripod, jabbing again as the bear lunged, its breath hot and rank, eyes burning with wild, starving rage. And then, voices. Distant at first, but rising over the howling wind. Sharp, urgent shouts echoed across the shoreline. Soren's scream had reached a research outpost several hundred meters away, where scientists spotted the commotion through binoculars. Now they sprinted toward him, flare guns in hand, shouting and waving as they crossed the treacherous ice. One flare ignited with a hiss, casting a sudden blaze of red and orange light across the snow. The bear paused mid-lunge, startled by the light and noise, its head snapping toward the approaching figures. Another flare hissed into the air and burst with a loud crack, trailing sparks and smoke. The bear hesitated, muscles twitching. Its eyes flicked between the struggling man at its feet and the bright, stinging light drawing closer. With a deep guttural growl, it backed away. Snow churned beneath its paws as it turned and loped off across the ice, disappearing into the jagged ridges from which it had come. Just like that, it was gone. Silence returned, except for the wind, the low groan of sea ice, and Soren's labored, gasping breaths. The researchers reached him within seconds, kneeling in the blood-streaked snow as he trembled uncontrollably. Blood soaked his torn parka and stained the ice beneath him, each breath shallow and strained. Working quickly, they wrapped him in emergency blankets, applied pressure to the worst wounds, and radioed for an air rescue. Time stretched painfully as they waited, the cold deepening, the sky dimming. Snowflakes drifted down, settling gently on blood, fabric, and broken gear. The Arctic sun, unmoving on the horizon, bathed the scene in a cold, indifferent light. An hour later, the low hum of rotor blades broke the quiet. A red rescue helicopter crested the ice shelf, sending swirls of powder into the air as it landed. Medics rushed out, crouched beside Soren, and assessed his condition with practiced urgency. He was pale, drifting in and out of consciousness, but alive. They stabilized him and lifted him onto a stretcher, carefully carrying him into the warmth of the chopper. His eyes fluttered open briefly inside, meeting the worried gazes of the scientists who had saved him. Gratitude flickered across his bruised and bloodied face. The helicopter lifted off, banking away toward Longyearbyen, its engine roar fading into the vast silence of the Arctic once more. In the days that followed, Soren's survival made headlines across Norway and beyond. Wildlife officials released statements warning of the increasing danger posed by polar bears, forced into new hunting patterns as Arctic sea ice continues to vanish. Once bound to the pack ice far from human settlements, these apex predators now stalk shorelines and research zones in desperate search of food. Experts emphasize the critical need for proper deterrence on all expeditions: flares, bear alarms, motion sensors, and the importance of maintaining constant vigilance in the field. Climate change, they explained, wasn't just shrinking the ice. It was bringing the world's largest land carnivore into ever more frequent, and sometimes deadly proximity, with the people studying the ice itself. Soren Bjornstad survived the encounter with multiple puncture wounds, deep lacerations, and fractured ribs, but his injuries would heal. What wouldn't fade so easily was the haunting memory of the moment when beauty and danger collided on the edge of the world, and the thin line between life and death disappeared in the snow. The summer air was crisp and bright in a remote part of Alaska on June 12, 2011, as Emma Clark set out alone for what she believed would be a peaceful morning hike through one of the region's most breathtaking valleys. The sun rose slowly over the jagged peaks in the distance, casting long shadows across fields of wildflowers and ancient spruce forests. The trails remained quiet except for the calls of birds and the rustling of leaves stirred by a light breeze. Emma, a 34-year-old teacher from Seattle, moved confidently along a narrow path bordered by dense brush, her boots crunching softly on gravel as she admired the pristine beauty around her. She felt a deep sense of freedom and tranquility, far removed from the noise and pace of city life. She had reviewed the standard warnings about bear safety before heading out and carried a can of deterrent spray clipped to her belt. But the morning felt so serene and inviting that her vigilance began to slip. She walked without concern, occasionally humming to herself, unaware that she was approaching dangerous territory. A brown bear's den lay hidden among thick shrubs just off the trail, home to a mother bear and her 2 cubs. The sow had sensed Emma's presence long before she came into view. Her ears twitched at the sound of unfamiliar footsteps, and her muscles tensed as a flood of protective instincts overtook her. Each step that Emma took pushed her further into the invisible boundary the bear had drawn around her young. The sudden explosion of noise and motion shattered the morning stillness. With no growl or warning, and no time for Emma to react, the bear charged from the underbrush. Massive paws struck the earth as the animal closed the distance in a blur of movement. Emma had only a moment to register the approaching danger before the bear reached her. A powerful swipe from the bear's forelegs slammed into her back, sending shockwaves of pain through her body. The force lifted her off her feet and threw her face first onto the ground. Above her loomed a wall of fur, heat, and rage, hot breath flooding her senses in ragged huffs. Paralyzed by pain and fear, Emma's body screamed for action, but her survival instincts took over. Recalling advice she had once read, she forced herself to remain still, playing dead. She curled her arms over the back of her neck and pressed her face into the dirt, doing her best not to cry out. Sharp claws raked across her back, tearing through her jacket and shirt, leaving burning trails of injury beneath. Her ribs throbbed with each breath, and a deep ache bloomed across her chest, suggesting multiple fractures. The bear sniffed and prodded her roughly, massive snout nudging her body in heavy, disorienting movements. Emma focused on keeping her breathing shallow and steady, despite the hammering of her heart that felt loud enough to betray her position. Every second stretched into eternity. The bear remained close, its low growls vibrating in the air, each breath warm against her scalp. Its enormous paws shifted in the earth beside her, the ground still damp from the previous night's rain, soaking into her clothes. The cold mud clung to her, mixing with blood and sweat. She lay frozen, her muscles quivering with terror, unable to anticipate what would come next. After nearly 2 minutes that felt like hours, the bear finally let out a sharp exhale, its ears flicking. It turned and retreated, crashing through the underbrush to return to its cubs. The sound of snapping branches faded, until only the soft rustle of leaves remained. The forest returned to an eerie stillness, interrupted only by the sound of Emma's ragged breathing. Elsewhere on the trail, nearby hikers had heard distant screams followed by the unmistakable growls of a bear. Alarmed, they moved quickly toward the source of the noise, boots thudding heavily against the ground as they scanned the area. Upon reaching the scene, they found Emma crumpled along the path. Her back was soaked with blood, and her clothing was torn and matted. Her eyes were wide with pain, but she was conscious. Without hesitation, the hikers checked her condition, applied pressure to the worst wounds using spare jackets, and attempted to keep her calm. One of them reached for a satellite phone, hands shaking as they relayed the details to emergency responders, giving their location and describing the attack with a sense of urgency and disbelief. Time dragged on as they waited for help. Every snap of a twig or distant rustle made Emma flinch, fearing the bear might return. Her breathing was shallow, and each attempt to inhale sent fresh waves of pain through her chest. The hikers remained by her side, offering sips of water, holding her hand, and trying to keep her engaged. After what felt like an eternity, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades broke through the air. A red rescue helicopter appeared overhead, causing the treetops to ripple in the downdraft. Paramedics descended quickly and efficiently, their voices calm yet firm as they assessed her injuries. With practiced movements, they secured her to a stretcher, stabilizing her condition for transport. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness during the flight, the noise of the helicopter and the chatter of the medics fading in and out like a distant echo. At a nearby hospital, she was treated for multiple broken ribs, deep lacerations, and extensive bruising. Injuries that required weeks of medical care and physical therapy. Her quick thinking and willingness to follow survival advice had likely saved her life. Though her recovery would be long and filled with physical and emotional challenges, she had survived what could have been a fatal encounter. In the aftermath of the incident, officials overseeing the protected area took swift action. They updated signage at popular trailheads, adding clearer guidance about the dangers of traveling near bear habitats, especially during seasons when cubs were present and adult bears were more defensive. Educational materials were revised to include more practical tips and case examples to help future visitors better understand the risks. For Emma, the memory of that day remained vivid, but so did the reality that she had made it home.